All right, so our first guest speaker today is Dr. Jackie Jacob. She is the Poultry Extension Project Manager at University of Kentucky. She is responsible for poultry extension throughout the state of Kentucky and has poultry extension activities nationwide as well as internationally. Although Dr. Jacob works some with commercial poultry producers, she primarily focuses on small commercial operations and backyard flocks, as well as youth poultry programs. She works with all types of poultry and management practices. She spent 4.5 years working in poultry extension with the University of Florida and 7.5 years with the University of Minnesota. She has been at the University of Kentucky for 15 years now. And so today we're having her here to talk to you about backyard laying hens. So if you will, let's welcome her to the podium.
Oops. Okay, let's see how this goes. I'm not very good at standing still, so since they're live streaming, I'm told I have to, so I'll do my best. So it's really hard to talk in a short period of time on managing egg-laying flocks because there is a lot to talk about, but one of the things that I always start out with is it's important to know why you have an egg-laying flock. When people ask me questions, breeds, housing, things like that, my answer is always, it depends. It always depends on why you are keeping chickens. Is it just for family consumption, or are you also going to sell eggs? Because selling eggs can be a little bit of extra money for the homestead, a lot of people like to try it, but there are legal issues that you have to consider before getting into it. You have to know who you can sell to, who can actually buy from you, because there are different rules on that aspect. Where can you build your chicken houses on your property? How can you dispose of dead birds? And producer liability. It's always a big issue. People want to make a few extra bucks by selling eggs. If somebody gets sick from your eggs, even if it's their fault because they didn't handle the eggs properly, they can still sue you and you can lose your entire farm. So if you are selling anything off your farm, it's always good to make sure that your insurance policy for your farm includes producer liability. And all producers, regardless of size, must follow egg law. Okay, even if you're just selling, a few dozen a week, you still have to follow egg law. Which is specifically important for safe handling of eggs. They have to be refrigerated. I know a lot of people who do not refrigerate eggs, but they must be refrigerated at all times, including transport if you are going to farmers markets. And of course, as it makes sense, all eggs sold must be fit for human consumption. This can be an issue if your chickens are free-ranging and you are out searching for your eggs. Sometimes you might not get them for a few days, so that can be an issue with some of them starting to have incubation. If you sell more than 60 dozen eggs in any 1 week, you need a license. If you have less than that, you do not. So if you do the calculations on recommended or reasonably expected production, that's about 100 hens. So if you have more than 100 hens, you need to have a license. But you also have to sell to the final consumer. So if you are selling to a store or a restaurant, then you need a license because you're not selling to the ultimate consumer. So it's always important, you know, to decide what you're going to do before you start selling eggs. You cannot reuse egg cartons. A lot of people that I've seen that sell a few eggs a week use old egg cartons. You cannot. It has to have your name and contact information, because if anyone gets sick, they need to be able to trace it back to you. And there are specific things that you have to have on your egg carton. So these are just two examples of small commercial operations. The Dutch Creek Farm sells eggs in some stores. They have a license. And then Elmwood Stock Farm, they sell to CSA. So just shows you how they have made their own labels on their egg cartons. If candled, you have to say what the grade is, and if they are not candled, it has to say that they are ungraded. You have to have the packing date, you have to have an expiration date, or sell-by date, which is 30 days after the packing date. And then if you want a use-by date, that's 45 days. So you have to have those dates on your cartons. You have to have a nutrition label. It has to be the USDA label. If you want to change it from the USDA label, you must apply and have research to support that. So most people are not going to do that. I think Eggland's Best is one of the ones that does do that. They test their feed regularly to make sure that they are getting the increased whatevers for their eggs. And you must have the safe handling instructions and the thing to refrigerate. You can include a variety of things on there, but you cannot make any nutritional claims. So if you're feeding something that can increase the omega-3s, you cannot say omega-3 enriched unless you have the paperwork to prove it, but you can say that they're fed diets high in omega-3s, but you must have feed ingredients, feed analysis to prove it. So if you put on the raised without hormones, you have to have the disclaimer that federal law prohibits the use of hormones in poultry production. Nobody uses hormones in poultry, so by putting that on there, you have to clarify it. You also need a product recall plan, so you need to know who you sold to, so if somebody gets sick and they trace it back to you, you can tell them who all your customers are. The big question you get a lot of times is, should you wash eggs, whether this is for home consumption or for sale. For sale, I would strongly recommend washing, but only if you do it right. And the main issue is typically salmonella. And there are different species or varieties, strains, whatever you want to call them, of salmonella. There are some that are fecal related, which is where washing comes in, but salmonella enteritidis is actually inside the egg when it's laid. It's a form of salmonella that infects the chicken and gets into the reproductive tract, and when she lays the eggs, it's already got salmonella in it. Washing's not going to make any difference, but it's why we strongly recommend refrigeration, even for yourself, because the number of salmonella is usually too low to make anyone sick, but if you leave it on the counter and the salmonella grows, then it could make people sick, especially those with weak immune systems. Research out of North Carolina State University showed that dirty, unwashed eggs from outdoor flocks had quite a high level of bacteria on the outside, and washing it reduced it dramatically. It basically reduced it to the level of clean, unwashed eggs, and washing those took it down to almost zero. So they don't recommend selling dirty eggs. If it's really dirty, I would throw them out. You know, if you can clean it a little bit for yourself, that's fine. But I would, you know, because you can get sued if anybody gets sick, I would only sell clean, unwashed eggs that you have washed. KDA recommends gathering the eggs frequently and washing them as soon as possible after collection. Don't wash the badly soiled and cracked eggs. Throw those out. And then put them in the refrigerator. As I said, how you wash eggs is important. Do not ever soak eggs. If they're so dirty you have to soak them, then you know all that bacteria is going to go inside the egg when you soak them. Use running water only, water that's warmer than the egg. That makes the contents expand, and so nothing gets inside. If the water is colder, the contents contract and suck in all the water with the bacteria. As I said, never soak eggs and never consume or sell the eggs that have been soaking in water. You can buy small egg washing machines if you're having a relatively large flock, but not large enough to have the great big commercial ones. There are also people who like to make egg washers for themselves, so if you're the creative kind with some mechanical skills, that's not me, then you can make your own washer. Unfortunately, the smaller ones are almost as expensive as the larger ones, so be careful. You may have to wash by hand for a while. Candling involves shining a light through the egg so you can see the interior contents. It helps you to remove blood and meat spots and then determine the grade based on air cell size, which is that little pocket, right in the top there. You're not allowed to sell any eggs with blood or meat spots. The problem is that most small flocks use brown egg layers, and brown eggs are harder to detect blood and meat spots because of the darker shell. And those breeds that lay brown eggs are usually the more genetically prone to blood and meat spots. So sort of a difficult thing to get them out. And if you're selling the chocolate colored ones or the green colored ones, it's even worse trying to find those. But if you get a customer that gets a blood or meat spot in their eggs, you may lose that customer. So taking a little extra care to make sure they're not there is always a good idea. They are not a health risk. They just don't look nice. Put off customers that don't know what they are. Blood spots, just because when it ovulated the yolk, a blood vessel broke and it got a little blood in it. A meat spot is just a piece of the lining of the oviduct that has sloughed off. Also, when you place eggs in the carton, and even if you buy them from the store, I would check and make sure they are all small end down. They stay fresher longer. With the small end up, the yolk will float to the top, get stuck in the small end, and when you break the egg, the yolk will bust. So don't put them small end up. Make sure you put them small end down. We have a lot of resources at the University of Kentucky to help you. We have marketing regulations affecting small-scale egg producers, and it's specific for Kentucky. And then we do have, if you're selling to the farmer's market, then we have a fact sheet on the proper handling and transportation of eggs for sale at farmers markets. And we have one on producer liability and the importance of having it. Marketing your eggs, you can label it with the production system that you're using, especially if it's something that, you know, might help in the sale. So cage-free, free roaming is just what it says. No cages. That does not mean they're outside. That just means they're not in cages. Free range does mean they have access to the outdoors. Doesn't say they use it, just says they have access to it. Pasture raised, they actually do have to be on pasture. Free range could be on anything, even rocks. Local, if you're selling it to your neighbors or at the local farmer's market. If it's a family farm, you can always add that. Having pictures of kids always helps with the sale, especially if you're asking above the price that's being sold in the stores. And then if it's organic, you can get it certified to say that it's certified organic. Take lots of photographs when you are raising chickens to sell eggs, especially if they are truly free-range, pasture-raised, or family management, especially if it's got kids in it. And use those photos in your marketing plan. More people are willing to pay more for a family farm, especially if it's got kids. And selling yourself as much as you are selling your eggs, so have a little story that goes along with your eggs. That always helps with the marketing. Make sure that you set a fair price for yourself, so know what it costs to get started. You have to build the chicken house, you have to buy the equipment, you may need fencing if they are outside, and you may need something to store the eggs in for transport or in the house. Your operating costs are buying the pullets ready to lay if you can, or the baby chicks if you have to brood them. Your feed. Right now, feed is extremely expensive. If you think that you can produce eggs cheaper than the store, despite the high prices in the store, sorry, you're wrong. Part of their problem, aside from the shortage of hens due to avian influenza, they also are paying high prices for feed, but because they buy in bulk, they can buy feed cheaper than you. So if you're buying in 50-pound bags, then it's going to cost you more. You have to buy egg cartons because you cannot reuse egg cartons. If your consumer comes and brings their own egg carton, that's fine, but you cannot sell it in somebody else's egg cartons. If you need veterinary supplies, bedding, water, utilities, labor, so make sure you include your time in, for the care of the flock in setting your price. And there are different management types. This is a free range with pasture in the Lexington area. He has this large house that's totally open. He uses it most of the year, although in really bad weather he moves them inside just because it's too cold, but they are totally free run, no walls. The feed is along the side. He has a water a little distance to make sure that they move in and out, and then of course they have the nest boxes inside. So you can see the water is a little distance from the house. So with the free range system, it's cheaper than building a big chicken house, but you need to maintain the pastures. If you want to say it's pasture raised, need a tractor to move this kind of house because it's so big. You need to think about getting the water out there. Predator control, they use the dogs, and whether or not you're adding lights to maintain year-round egg production. Cage-free, as I said, is just without cages, so this is a flock that's on the floor. They have perches, they have the feeders, the waters, the nest boxes, and of course bedding material, all the things you need for a good laying flock. So the main costs are the bedding material, water and egg collection is pretty easy. Lighting is easier to control. Predator control is easier, but you can also get additional revenue from composting the bedding material. It's really good for fertilizer on gardens. So if your purpose is to make money and you're looking at what breed do you want, you need to think about the things that you want. You want a good egg producer with good livability in the conditions that you're raising them in, good feed conversion, easy to manage birds, whatever egg color you're particularly looking for. Green is very popular. One of those commercial operations I showed you, she sells by the dozen, and every dozen has at least one green egg in it. So it has 11 brown and 1 green. Age at maturity, which is when they start laying. Can you resale the bird at the end of production? And is it a good forager if you are free ranging? So some of the ones that I see a lot of are the red sex lynx. If you go to the hatchery, they're called by a variety of names, with red star, golden comet, road bar, cinnamon queen. All of those are a sex link cross. You can see the crosses there for each of the different kinds. But basically you can sex them when they hatch, because the male chicks are all white and the female chicks are all brown, so your chance of sexing errors from vent sexing is lower, so you're less likely to get a rooster. You do not need a rooster for hens to lay eggs. They know how to do it all by themselves. The commercial Isa Brown is based on a red sex-link cross, and some of the hatcheries will sell an Isa Brown equivalent. They start laying early at 16 to 17 weeks of age. And I lost my slide. So they can lay a fair number of eggs, light brown color, large eggs from the start. They typically don't go broody. When a chicken is broody, they don't lay eggs. They're cold, sturdy, good foragers, and they're not that big, so resale value could go down. Black sex lynx is another one that you might get. Again, they're able to sex at day 1. So sometimes called black stars, light brown eggs. You can see the numbers there. Easter eggers are popular. They don't lay as well, but they do lay a variety of colors. But 1 out of 100 will develop severe crossbeak. It's just a genetic flaw. They do, depending on how you manage them, a fair number of eggs. The olive egger is also popular because of the green eggs. The eggs do start out small, but do get bigger at the end. They lay less eggs, but don't usually go broody. And it's important to remember that chickens do not lay every day indefinitely. I get a lot of calls, my chickens are 3 years old and they stop laying eggs. Well, yeah, they're 3 years old. What did you expect? They usually start, go to peak, and then slowly decline. They'll reach a point where they're eating more money in feed than they are producing in eggs, in which case you can either molt them, put them out of production, and try another curve, which will be lower and shorter, or you can start with new pullets, depending on the costs involved. If you want to maintain the hens laying all year round, you need to maintain a minimum of 14 hours of light per day and never let the amount of light decrease. Chickens come into production with increasing day length and go out of production with decreasing day length. So you need to maintain it at least 14 hours. If they start to decline, you can bump it up to a maximum of 16 to try and keep them in production year-round. You can get light bulbs that only come on when it's dark out, but then you can put a timer in for your 14 or 16 hours, and so you will never get a shorter day. When you place ready-to-lay pullets, not bullets, their nutritional needs are the highest. They are still growing. They need to maintain their body weights, and then, of course, they're starting egg production. And nutrition is always the problem I see with backyard flocks. I get a lot of calls, with health problems, and that's because they'll feed a complete feed, but then they'll dilute the nutrients with scratch grains or cracked corn and result in nutritional deficiencies. So if you think of the chicken feed similar to our MyPlate, the grains provide the energy, which comes from corn, wheat, or barley. The protein source provides the amino acids, which are the building blocks in order to produce the proteins that the birds need, and there are a variety of feed sources that they can use for that. The fruits and vegetables primarily provide the vitamins and trace minerals, and there are usually a premix to make sure that happens. And what we would drink as milk provides the calcium and phosphorus, and they use limestone or dical. So the feeds are designed to meet the energy requirement of the birds, and when they eat that amount of feed to meet that energy requirement, they will get all the nutrients they need to be healthy birds and lay eggs. But if you dilute that feed with scratch grains, cracked corn, or some other source of energy, you are overloading that plate with energy. As I said, the chickens will eat to meet their energy requirement. So if you have mixed it with an energy source, they're going to eat less of the complete feed, and they will not get all the protein, vitamins, and minerals that they need, and you start to see problems. So some of the nutrition and reproductive problems that you see: peritonitis, egg-bound, or prolapse are the most common. Chickens can be very fatty, so with that high amount of energy, you're going to get very fatty chickens, and that's not all that fat is down where they lay the eggs, which is going to make egg laying harder. The reproductive system has the ovaries and the oviduct, which are separate. They have the infundibulum, which grabs the yolk after it is ovulated from the ovaries, but sometimes they miss. And so there's the infundibulum. So if they miss, it goes into the body cavity and becomes infected, because yolk is a really good source of growing material for bacteria. And so you start getting a penguin-like stance as their belly fills. You may start getting more laying deformed or soft-shelled eggs, and they may be eating or drinking less. The causes can be genetic, they can be stress, they can be a problem with the immune system, but typically the one I see is from overweight hens, infections and parasites, ovarian tumors and oviduct impaction can also cause it, but as I said, nutrition and overweight birds is usually the problem. Egg bound is when the egg gets stuck in the oviduct. Egg binding occurs when the hen has been straining for a few hours trying to lay a single egg. Again, you get that penguin-like stance, and it's usually a nutritional problem. Calcium is very important for muscle function, so if you have a calcium deficiency, that muscle that is the oviduct, it moves the egg along, does not function properly, so it gets stuck. They become hypocalcemic, so you start getting all sorts of problems, and obesity can be one of them. So prolapse is another thing. When the hen lays an egg, the egg drops out of, the oviduct comes out, and if it doesn't retract properly, that's a prolapse. And if they have a calcium deficiency, that will cause prolapse. So all of those types of problems are related to nutrition. The age of the hens, you may get more prolapse afterwards. And if the intensity of the light is too high, they can peck at the oviduct when it comes out, cause damage, and they can't go back in. So some of the causes, again, is the unbalanced feed rations is the main one I see, so that they have insufficient calcium. Always provide your hens with purchase starting early, keeps them off the ground, and they like to perch. So for daily care, look at your hens when you go into the house. Are they distributed properly? Are the hens breathing normally? Are they panting? Panting is a sign of heat stress. Are they all feeding, drinking, dust bathing, preening, all their normal behaviors? Look at the litter condition. Is it caking? Is there feed or water spills that need to be cleaned up? Are the feeders and waters at the right height? They should be at the height of the back of the chickens. Always look for any spoiled feed in the feeders and clean those out. Make sure your waters aren't leaking and causing problems. Listen to the hens. Are they snicking, sneezing, or making other respiratory sounds? What are the vocalizations like? How does it change from one visit to the next? Look at smell. How does the feed smell? Is it fresh or musty? How's the air? If you can smell ammonia already, then it's too high. Hold the birds periodically. Check their feet and hocks for any problems. A lot of times people will get bumblefoot, which is basically an infection of the bottom of the feet, and they won't even notice it because they haven't handled the birds enough. Check all the parts, the vent, the beak, the tongue, the crop, their general demeanor. Look at their eyes, skin, breast, feathering, leg health, all those types of things. Periodically check the litter to make sure that it's good. Grab a handful of the litter and squeeze and see what it's like. If it's right, it will slightly adhere to your hand and break when you drop it. If it's too moist, it will stay compact even when you drop it. And if it's too dry, then it will adhere to your hand when squeezed. One of the things I like to stress is always wash your hands after handling live poultry or anything related to live poultry, whether that be the eggs or the equipment. This is because every year around this time, we have a salmonellosis outbreak traced back to backyard flocks. And I'm sure none of you will do it, but a lot of them see their chickens as pets. They bring them in the house. You can buy diapers to bring chickens in the house. They'll have them on the kitchen table and then eat dinner. They'll wash things in the kitchen sink and not disinfect it afterwards. Their kids, sometimes the adults, will kiss and hug the chicks, okay? All chicks can have salmonella. Salmonella will make you sick. So if you don't handle them properly, you could get sick. Last year, we were down with only 26 people getting sick in the state. The year before that, we had 86. Total last year around the country was 1,200 and something, and 2 people died. So please, always wash your hands. Don't let your chickens run around in the backyard where the kids are going to play, because they'll pick it up. Don't go out and have a picnic in the backyard if your chickens have been running around pooping. We have a lot of resources. If you just type, smallflocks.net, it will redirect you to our department website, where we have information on general poultry stuff, youth programming, small and backyard flocks, commercial production, consumer education, and urban poultry. We also have a Facebook page where we post the most recent information that is specific as much as possible to Kentucky. We also have fact sheets specific for egg laying in Kentucky, why have my hens stop laying, how to molt your chickens, and there's a new one just came out. Bed bugs are becoming a problem in cage-free birds, including commercial operations, and they can go from chicken house to the human house and vice versa. So be on the lookout for bed bugs in your poultry house. And then we have the electronic version of the National Cooperative Extension, and it is specific for small and backyard flocks. It's just poultryextension.org. We have a Facebook page that is a national one. We do webinars. All webinars are recorded and posted. It writes articles on a variety of topics. There's a blog, and we do have an Ask Extension feature. I typically get any of the questions from Kentucky that are poultry related, but it has to go through the whole electronic system. So if you have a question, it's faster to just email me rather than trying to go through the system. But if you want to, you can. You can also ask other questions on other topics. So that's what I have for you. Any questions? Microphone? Oh, sorry, she beat you.
So, on, not on.
It's not on.
Oh, it is now. So you ran through the candling, and I was just wondering, you said that, what was it? I wrote it down. Anyway. That it would remove the blood spot. How does that happen?
It doesn't remove the blood spot.
The thing said, I was like, what do you mean it removes blood spots?
It detects the blood spots and meat spots so that you do not sell those eggs. You pull out any eggs with blood or meat spots.
Is there any consensus on young chicks and cedar shavings versus pine shavings?
The problem with cedar shavings is that they do have tannins in them, so if they get in the water and they drink the water, then they're having tannins. There was some concern with, odors, but unless it's a really confined area, which is more the case with like hamsters and gerbils and stuff, that's not usually the problem. It's usually the tannins. So we don't recommend cedar, we recommend the pine shavings. If you have cedar shavings and they're cheaper, you can, mix them to try and reduce the price of the pine shavings. And she's had her question for a while.
Yes, I bought some production laying hens this year, which I typically don't, but I find that their shells are so much weaker, and I've added extra oyster shell. They did the non-GMO like all the rest of the chickens, but their eggs tend to break so much easier when I wash them. Is there any other solution, or is it just the kind of chicken?
What are you feeding?
A non-GMO layer feed from Baghdad. It's a pellet.
No scratch grains?
No,
Cracked corn?
I mean, I give them extra table scraps every night, but they get that throughout the day. All the feeders are full. I mean,
Are they eating it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
they eat the...
And the oyster shell doesn't work? Are they eating the oyster shell?
It works a little bit, but still not as good as like my other layers. Like the Easter eggers, their shells are so much better. My sexlings, those are so much better. But these production hens, I think they're a split off of the Isa Browns. Their feathering isn't always as good either. And their egg just doesn't seem as bright yellow either.
It sounds like a nutritional problem rather than a disease problem. There are some diseases that will result in weaker shells, but it sounds more like a nutritional problem. And if you're feeding a layer feed, I don't understand why.
I know, I'm boggled also. I've called Baghdad and questioned about their feed. And
Because it's the same feed for the Easter eggers, right?
yeah, it's the same, they all get the same feed.
Yeah.
If they're laying eggs more often, they're going to be using
Yeah,
more
they're gonna-
calcium. So a chicken laying 3 eggs every other day versus one laying eggs every day, so where they're higher.
So it's just gonna happen that way?
Well, the nutritional need's going to be higher. So
Yeah, she's just talking that if you have an Easter egger that's laying once every other day versus a production hen that's laying every day, their nutritional requirements are higher than they are for the Easter egger. The fact that you have feathering problems is a protein deficiency. The shell is a calcium phosphorus problem. So you may have to switch to a more nutritious meal for the production hens than for the Easter eggers, because they're probably laying more eggs, correct?
Yeah, that's what I think, because they're meant for production, so they're laying every day.
Yeah, so I would look at a different feed that is more nutrient dense than the one you're feeding for the Easter egger. It'll cost you more though.
So am I looking for a higher protein then, for the more amino acid, or what's the compound that I'm looking for?
You're looking for calcium and protein and vitamins. So, but they should be all right because they usually use a premix.
If that guy can customize your feed for you.
Yeah, I know that, but they feel like they're giving me all they can already. Like they feel like it's the perfect blend already.
Obviously, it's not.
We don't have chickens yet, so these might seem silly questions to people that do, but I've got a couple of questions. One, what do you do with the chickens once they are past laying? And the other is, you mentioned overweight chickens several times. How do you manage that once you notice they are becoming overweight?
If they're becoming overweight, you're going to want to reduce the level of feed, the energy in the feed, without reducing the other nutrients. So you may have to talk to your feed source. But as for after production, that depends on whether they're pets or livestock. There are markets for those for people who would like to eat an older bird because they have more flavor in it. It's a tougher bird, so you need like a pressure cooker or something to be able to do it so that you don't have to boil it half to death. Well, no, completely to death, but hopefully to make it more flavorful. But there are ethnic markets that do prefer an older bird, or you can kill it yourself and eat it. Very little places will actually process it for you, though.
Okay, I have a question about someone who is not selling their eggs, but you're curious about the nutritional content. So is there a way that, just so you know, you could still get your eggs tested for the quality?
You have to go to a commercial lab to get it tested. It will cost you money to do that. But as long as you're feeding the normal feed, it will be normal.
Right here. She doesn't know where that is. I have two questions. I'm to your right.
To your right,
2
okay.
o'clock.
Gotcha.
You have two questions. They're basically regarding feed. What are your thoughts on fermenting feed? Does fermenting feed help with the nutrition? And then the other thing would be biochar. I've heard that maybe a little bit of biochar will help with nutrition in the feed.
I haven't seen biochar being overly worth the price. If you're feeding a complete feed, there is no reason to ferment it. A lot of people do, and you're basically just producing lactobacillus, which is a probiotic. If you think that you need a probiotic, you can buy products that have the right bacteria specific for poultry. My only concern with the fermenting is all the things that can go wrong if you don't do it right. And I've dealt with some of those, you know, so I don't recommend it unless you really know what you're doing. And I don't think that all it's doing is taking your energy to grow bacteria. So they're going to eat more of it because the energy's been reduced. But you can get mold, you know, mycotoxins, all sorts of problems if you don't do it correctly. So I don't recommend it. It's not necessarily worth the extra effort.
Could you address molting a little bit? I have just some totally free-range chickens. They eat, a lot of their diet is bugs, frankly. They never molt, they're healthy, they never stop laying. I mean, chickens molt, and mine don't, and I'm just wondering what...
How old are they?
All ages.
And they, even a 3-year-old's never molted? It's unusual. They're probably not laying very well either.
Yeah, they're laying extremely well.
Oh, yeah? It happens sometimes, but if they're a production type, they will eventually molt. If they're some of the other alternatives, they may not. And it depends on how much bugs they're getting. Do you adjust for seasonal changes in bugs? Right, they'll do that, they'll adjust. So you are adjusting for changes in availability of what's on.
Oh. Oh, hello. I had a question specific to urban homesteading in the Louisville, Lexington area. We've had a few clients that have done complete soil remediations on their property, and they want to have chickens now as in addition to crops. And I was wondering the impact on lead in the soil level of lead for chickens, or if we need to do a complete soil remediation for any property in the city limits that need that want chickens.
There is no acceptable level for lead, especially for children. It can cause major problems. If there is lead in their soil, they should not have chickens on it.
Okay, so I have two questions that go together. I've never had chickens, and I live in town, so I'm limited to how many I can have. What is the minimum amount of chickens that you should start with? I mean, when you get chickens, I can't have more than 4.
Well,
should they all
right
be the same breed, or could you get, so like I'm kind of, and I'm not sure I'm saying this right, Orpington?
Orpingtons, yes.
Yeah, so I'm kind of interested in those, but there's others also. Could you get one of each, or do they do better if they're all the same?
You can get anything you want, but there is a state law that says you cannot buy less than 6 chicks under the age of 8 weeks. So if you only want 4, then you either have to wait till they're 8 weeks old to get them, so you need to know somebody that sells pullets, or you have to have 6, and if you have any mortality, you have extra room, or you give them to somebody who doesn't want to buy 6. So there is no magic number for a flock. 1 is no good other than that. I know a lot of backyard flocks that just have 3, including buff Orpingtons, because they're nice. But the number depends on the size of the family, the type of chicken, how much it's going to lay, that sort of, how much room you have. And make sure that you check the local ordinances, including homeowners associations, because a lot, like Lexington allows you to keep chickens, but homeowners associations, many do not. So the homeowners association next to mine does not, although people are, because I can hear them. But
I have 2 questions. The first one was regarding, you were talking about bedding earlier, wood shaving, cedar versus pine. We use grass hay. Is there any problem with that? That's the first one. Second is regarding shelf stable or shelf life at room temperature for eggs. How long can you safely hold them at room temperature as long as you don't wash them?
I don't recommend saving eggs at room temperature, and especially not selling them. If they're not washed and keeping them at room temperature, for every day that you keep them out of the fridge is like 7 days in the fridge. So I would not recommend it from health reasons. If you did it, I would make sure you have a quick turnover. I wouldn't keep more than a week. As far as bedding, you can use straw or grasses, but it's preferred that they be chopped, mainly because they tend to cake. So that if they get manure on and water, they tend to stick together, and you start getting ammonia problems. But you can use anything that is absorbable, will absorb moisture and release it again if it needs to, and that you can use afterwards, so it would compost, which it would. I've seen in the feed stores, chopped straw. It's the right length. It's actually for, garden beds, but it will work as well. Just watch out if you're using grass for mold and dust, because the dust might be a problem.
Hi. You shared some of the different breeds that are good egg producers. Are there any that are also both good egg producers and docile in terms of being easily handled by kids, like not super young, but like 5 to 10 years old, to help with caring for them?
The Orpingtons are popular because they are, and a lot of it's the difference between a hen and a rooster. Some of the roosters, even from the docile breeds, can be quite aggressive, especially if you touch their hens. But most hens, if they don't have chicks, are relatively docile, especially if you've raised them up from chicks and they know you. If you're getting pullets, ready to lay pullets, if you're looking for an enterprise raising ready to lay pullets for sale, there's a market for that. And if you go to Lexington or Louisville, you can charge outrageous prices for them, especially if they just want 3. They didn't want to buy the 6 and deal with the extra 3 or any roosters that pop up. So by 10 weeks you can already sex any of them without a problem. So, but if you're looking for a pet, silkies are really good. But there are dual purpose breeds. And it'll say dual purpose when you go to the hatchery. And most of them, the roosters, not so much, but the hens are usually pretty good.
Hi. So you might have touched on this, and I'm sorry, it's a silly question, but my family and I have only ever raised chickens in the past for our own consumption, our own egg consumption. So, and I've always been told that you shouldn't wash your eggs before you consume. Well, they last longer. So obviously don't let them stay in the fridge for too long, but that's what we've always been told. I just didn't know if there's any truth to that at all. So wanted to hear what you had to say on that.
North Carolina State University has shown that the bacterial contamination on a clean, unwashed egg is relatively high. If you want to be safe, wash, but always wash with warmer water than the temperature of the egg, and never soak it, right? Dry it completely before putting in an egg carton and putting it in the fridge. Because years ago, it was basically a sterile egg that was laid. But with Salmonella enteritidis, which popped up about 25, 30 years ago, it inhabits the reproductive tract of the hen and gets into the egg before it's laid. And so, washing isn't going to change that, but refrigerating will keep you safe. No. There's one. Time up. I'll be around.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob.